The spindles have been closed for centuries, our kingdoms cut off from the other realms, until now. With the swing of a blade, the world is cracking apart, broken by those who would burn it down and rule over the ashes. The heroes failed. Now we are the only ones left to save the realm. We may not be good enough, but we just might be bad enough.
Victoria, good morning. Jeff in Las Vegas.
Good morning. I love that background.
Well, thank you. Tried to impress you this morning.
Oh, I'm impressed. I love that map so much. The artist, she made a masterpiece.
Oh, I looked at it for like 30 minutes, just looking it all over. It's fascinating. Good. The detail's amazing on it.
The detail, it's incredible. And once, if anyone's read the book and then they look back at the map, there are some nice little Easter eggs in there.
That's so cool. Well, thank you for joining me to talk about your new novel, Realm Breaker. Your fantasy Red Queen launched a hit series and was on the bestsellers league its first week. Did you approach writing Realm Breaker with more confidence?
No.
Oh,
if anything, I was more nervous because I'd been through it before. It was not my first rodeo anymore, and I kind of knew what bullets there were to dodge. Whereas the first time around, I was a little babes in the woods, and it was just, oh, this is great, this is great, this is great. And now I sort of know where the pitfalls are. And you obviously, having had a series like that was so successful and is very much once in a lifetime, it feels a little greedy to want it again and try and do it again. But here I am, and I just hope that this book finds an audience and finds the support that Red Queen did, because I got so lucky.
And were you a were you a fan of the fantasy genre when you were a child?
Absolutely. I think that was the first thing that really brought me into storytelling, both on the literature side and in film and in video games too. I definitely was a kid who grew up with Star Wars and Legend of Zelda and Ella Enchanted when I was little.
Yeah, I was a D&D kid, and all my friends in high school and junior high, we played Dungeons and Dragons and Middle Earth and Warhammer. So yeah, I grew up all on fantasy. So.
Oh, great.
And creating an entire new universe, where does that inspiration come from?
I definitely came from the real world as my parameters. And I think that's very helpful to figure out how to build a world that feels real, because it needs to sort of layer onto itself. So starting with the geography, that map that you see is the artist rendition of the map I was using while I was writing the book. And I find that starting with that base level of here's where the land masses are, here's where the mountains are, all of that informs politics and informs the way that kingdoms rise and grow. And that then informs your story, which that then informs your characters. And it helps it feel that much more real when there's a history to it and things that make sense. And you understand, well, this happened here 100 years ago, and that's why this is happening now. I love having that depth to a world because it just makes the characters in the story that much more believable. And especially in a fantasy, that can be really hard. And that's the number one thing you have to do to get the audience to come with you, is make them believe.
I made the mistake about 2 weeks ago of watching the first couple episodes of Game of Thrones. I hadn't seen it yet. So I ended up binge watching all 8 seasons in an entire week. So it's crazy, right? And I was fascinated with the vocabulary in Game of Thrones. And I always think of Dune also with the vocabulary. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering, where does your vocabulary come from Realm Breaker? How do you create all these words that go with all these stories?
There's definitely a balance. And I think Game of Thrones does that really well, where they have names and words and terms that feel familiar. And, you have Ned Stark, and his full name is Eddard, which is a little weird, but Ned we get, and it helps us connect to the character that much faster. So I definitely had to balance, having the really out there names and things with apostrophes in them and stuff that's going to intimidate a reader, with also making it feel lived in, and having nicknames and having colloquialisms that connect to our own. Dune also does a really good job of throwing you into the story and not really explaining things to you, and you have to really, give it 100 pages before you get it. And I tried to walk the line of not doing that too much, but also having faith in my readers and having faith in their intelligence.
I remember when I saw Dune first run as a child in the theater, and they handed out a vocabulary list. And I remember when they had a sheet of it, and when people were speaking it, people were turning around with the light in the theater to see what Arrakis was and all the stuff. They had it all there.
Oh my
And when you wrote Realmbreaker, I understand you went into it knowing that it was going to be a multi-POV story.
Yes, I really loved that. So Red Queen started out for the first 2.5 books with one POV, and then it expanded depending on what the story needed and where I still needed more story to be told by different people. So coming into Realmbreaker, I was kind of primed for more POVs, but I also knew this was going to be very much an ensemble cast, and I wasn't going to be in the head of only one person because the world could not be told that way. And I also got to have people from all different walks of life and all different backgrounds. And I was nervous about making them all feel and sound different. But that wasn't a challenge at all. Somehow I really had a great time, and they all sound so distinct in my head and I understand them so well. I did a little exercise before I wrote the book of what would each of the main characters be doing in a bar fight. And that sort of defined who they were for me very, very quickly. And then about 3/4 of the way through the book, I realized, oh, I can have that bar fight. And that was a real joy.
Well, all these perspectives, you can't forget this is for young adults, right? A young adult audience. So can't keep it too complicated.
Complicated, but I think young adult readers, they like complicated. So long as the story is fast and so long as the story pulls them, they're going to come with you. And strangely enough, once you look at the data, YA books, half of our readership are adults. We really go in both directions. And I love that about YA. It's very much sort of the center of the literature universe. We connect to readers all over the spectrum.
And this series always was planned as a trilogy?
It was, yes. So with my film background, I'm very, very married to 3-act, 8-sequence structure. And that's how I structure my individual stories, but that's also how I structure a series. So for instance, the second book is very much Act 2, and the end of Act 2 is always your lowest point. So I'm really excited to write the end of book 2 because that's going to be a hard scene for readers and a really fun scene for me.
Well, congratulations on the new book, and I appreciate you taking the time today. And let's get those film rights sold so I can watch the movie.
Yes, exactly. From your lips to God's ears.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, and good luck with the book.
Thank you.
Thank you.